Um, good morning, everyone. So my name is Lynn Campbell, and I work for the BC government in the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship. It kept its same name after the election, and I'm very feel very honored and thankful to be calling today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. And I'd like to quickly introduce who our speakers are today, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dominique. So we have two speakers. We have from Metro Vancouver, Josephine Clark is going to be talking about Metro Vancouver sensitive ecosystem mapping and its practical applications. And then we're going to have a presentation from Paige and Emily, who are from Habitat Acquisition Trust. And they're going to be talking about how to be a good neighbor to nature. And it's 22 years of lessons learned, which is pretty incredible. And so, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dominique, who's going to do an opening statement. And welcome. Thank you.
Hajka, Lynn and Josephine, Emily, Paige and Megan at the Outskapeth at the Enoch, Inanu, Helixen, the Giatanga at the Muk Stays, Quitol Naquilia at the Schwinades at the Chichial Schwinades at the Tangoch Mukachin. So Snamithia at the Snatch, Latson at Kusanich, Tututa all Chowson at the St. Jonathan Squales at the Pachil, and then you Giatanga at the Stays at the Enoch, the Dewius Sensa at the Stays at the Enoch, the Hajka Seat at Siam at the Howasquachel at the Enoch, the Giatanga at the Outskapeth at the Enoch, and now all at the Squelquins, at the Ites, the Punnocks, at the Schwanids at the Enoch, a Quantat Zenith at the Muck Stain, at the Muck Teletasonoch, at the Muck Chechiel, Suwaika, at the Sun Slaney, a Angstoch, and I Sait all square at the Enoch, a Quantat Zenith, Hashka Hill, Sitat Siam, a Icon Stachels Hala at the Outskapeth at the Enoch, a Angstoch at the Schwanids at the Chechial Schwanids, a Hashka Hills at the Nekwa all Tachels Nanet Ava at the Enoch. Hashka Siam. Hashka.
Thank you so much, Dominique. It's such a gorgeous language to listen to. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, well, that's such a lovely way, I think, to start off our sharing knowledge today. So I think without further ado, we can pass the reins over to Josephine.
Fantastic. Thank you. Just going to share my screen, get this going. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the CDFCP for the opportunity to speak today. I'm reaching out to you today from Burnaby, which is on the shared territories of the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Very happy to be here. My name is Josephine Clark. I'm a natural resource management planner with Metro Vancouver's regional parks team. Excuse me. I'm a biologist and a GIS specialist by training, and I'm going to talk today about Metro Vancouver's sensitive ecosystem mapping program. I'm going to focus on kind of how we developed it, why we developed it, and what are some of the different ways that we use the data. So first of all, just to give you a bit of background as to Metro Vancouver and context as to why we would want to develop a sensitive ecosystem mapping program. Metro Vancouver is a pretty diverse organization. We plan for and deliver regional utility services, so that's water, sewers, wastewater treatment, and solid waste management. We also have an air quality regulation function. We plan for urban growth. manage a regional park system, which is where I work. We provide affordable housing and serve as a regional federation for the 21 municipalities, one electoral area, and one treaty First Nation, all located in the region of Metro Vancouver. So then the sensitive ecosystem mapping program has always been a joint effort between the regional parks and the regional planning teams, but is used by many other departments as well as other local governments and the wider region. So this is a map of the region, and it shows the natural areas that are managed by Metro Vancouver. And these areas total about 74,000 hectares, and they're managed to protect natural values both as part of the regional park system, but as well as the water supply areas, which provide drinking water to 2.8 million people. So sensitive ecosystem mapping work began for Metro Vancouver back in 2010, and it was born out of a recognized need for high quality, relatively detailed, consistent ecosystem mapping for the Metro Vancouver region. So the regional parks team was looking for something that would help us understand kind of ecosystem sensitivities and relative importance to inform our management. And our regional planning team is responsible for stewarding Metro 2050, which is the regional growth strategy. This strategy, it contains a number of environmental policies relating to the protection of nature. But back in 2010, the lack of regional scale ecosystem data meant that we didn't have a way of assessing whether progress was being made on these policies or where they were succeeding or failing. And many municipalities in the region were in the same position. They didn't have the data to support decision-making or understand and track what was happening in their jurisdiction in relation to natural areas. So there was an acknowledgement that regional scale ecosystem mapping was needed to act as a resource to inform decision-making and land use and conservation planning. But there's a wide range of other uses, so not just for government, also academics, consultants, environmental NGOs. It's been really amazing to see the number of different uses that have appeared over the years. So in 2010, after conducting quite a bit of research into possible methodologies, we began work on the first Metro Vancouver sensitive ecosystem inventory. So sensitive ecosystem inventories are a provincial mapping methodology. There are many other SEIs across BC, and they define a sensitive ecosystem as being one that is at risk, rare, ecologically fragile, or ecologically important because of the diversity of species that they support. So on this slide, these are some of the key reasons that we decided on using the SEI mapping method. So official standards exist for how to develop an SEI. These standards they give you a framework to work within. You still have a lot of decisions to make about how to design an SEI appropriately for the area that you're mapping, but they at least give you this frame within which to operate. The SEI method itself was designed to be a cost-effective form of mapping, suitable for mapping large areas. And we had a large area to map. Our project area was about 365,000 hectares. The SEI mapping is also, it's easily interpreted and understood. It communicates the mapping in terms that are easier for people to understand. So it's a wetland, it's a mature forest. And that was important for us because we needed it to be accessible and useful to a wide range of staff, not just vegetation ecologists. The SEI method was designed to have a strong link to another provincially defined type of mapping, which has been around a lot longer, so terrestrial ecosystem mapping or TEM mapping. You can create an SEI map from terrestrial ecosystem mapping, and this was helpful to us because some TEM data was already available in the region. So these are all the reasons why we chose the SEI method. So the Metro Vancouver Sensitive Ecosystem Inventory maps 11 classes of sensitive ecosystem, so old forests, wetlands, alpine, etc. And then each of these classes is mapped to a subclass level. So for example, within the wetland class, we have bogs, fens, swamps, marshes, and shallow water wetlands. The classification system includes size cutoffs, and that's partly a pragmatic approach to mapping a large area, but it's also because we're trying to capture the most important areas. So areas that might meet the classification to be a sensitive ecosystem but are less than half a hectare are generally not included in the mapping. That cutoff was not, firmly enforced, but it's kind of a general guideline for mappers. The SEI methodology also gives you leeway to identify other important ecosystems that are younger but still have significant ecological value. And we call these modified ecosystems. And in the Metro Vancouver SEI, we include young forests, so that's forests aged 30 to 80 years, and old field habitat. We only include larger examples of modified ecosystems, so 2.5 hectares for old field, 5 hectares for young forests. And the reason we include modified ecosystems is because in regions like Metro Vancouver, we've lost a lot of the sensitive ecosystems. So these modified ecosystems are playing an important role in supporting biodiversity. We do also map and include in the inventory young forest patches that are less than 5 hectares. We don't report them out on our official numbers, but we felt that these areas are important to at least track if we are to have a complete picture of what's happening with forests in the region. So this is an image of the Metro Vancouver SEI. It's a GIS data set. It tells us where sensitive and important modified ecosystems are, what type they are, and what state they're in, which we call quality. And I'll talk a little bit more about quality in a minute. The original Metro Vancouver SEI was based on 2009 ortho photos, and we've completed 2 updates now in 2014 and 2020. And so by updating the SEI, we can start to track change over time. And that's very powerful information if you want to inform policy and decision making. So I think an important thing to understand is that this is not an inventory of all green areas in the region. It only includes ecosystems that meet the classification. It doesn't include very small, very young, or very disturbed areas. One observation I would make while we're looking at this image is that this is really an inventory of 2 halves. So in the north, you have this largely natural and mature ecosystems, and in the south, it's much more fragmented and with fewer areas that meet the standard to be included in the SEI. So how did we go about creating the SEI? So it was generated in a few different ways. Where so terrestrial ecosystem mapping existed, and that was for the regional park system, the water supply areas, and some provincial parks. We could use this information to generate the SEI. It still required some manual work. It's not a completely easy switch over, but it's easier than generating the mapping from scratch. There was already an SEI conducted for Bowen Island, and we could translate that to the Metro Vancouver SEI. Again, there's some manual adjustments required, but it was more straightforward. And then everywhere else, we have a team of mappers that are reviewing ortho photos, they're drawing polygons, and they're adding attributes for each individual ecosystem example. So we also conducted a lot of field checking. We conducted as much as we could for such a large area. And field checking is important because it helps to confirm classification. It gives you confidence and your users confidence in your mapping, and it helps you can use what you learn in other areas around the SEI. So the areas that were already TEM mapped, they had already quite a bit of field checking, about 35% for the Metro Vancouver TEM. We field checked about 20% of the new mapping area. So overall for the whole inventory, about 20% of all polygons in the SEI have been field checked. So as we were developing the SEI, we also heard from people that they needed to know something about what state ecosystems are in. So something to help people understand not just what's present and where, but what kind of condition is it in. So we designed a custom approach to give an assessment of ecosystem quality. The method is based on the BC Conservation Data Centre and NatureServe method of assessing ecosystem viability, but we adjusted it to make it work in a more developed region. We found the viability method hard to apply in our context. So condition, landscape context, and size are assessed for each SEI polygon and combines to give an overall ecosystem quality attribute. So condition looks at what disturbances are visible within the polygon and what the edge of the polygon is like. Does it jut up against development, or does it jut up against other natural vegetation or modified vegetation? There are many things that you can't generally see in an ortho, invasive species presence, for example, but by looking at what the edge of the ecosystem polygon is and visible disturbances, that's a pretty good proxy. If you're seeing them jut up against developed areas, you're highly likely to see invasives and other human disturbances in that polygon that you might not be able to tell from the orthos. So this condition attribute is assessed manually for each polygon by a mapper. So it's a significant undertaking, but does bring a lot of value. Landscape context. This is a basic proxy for fragmentation. It's an automated assessment using a land cover data set that assesses the proportions of developed areas versus vegetated areas in the area surrounding each ecosystem polygon. And then size is taken from the GIS. So, and what we consider a good size for an ecosystem polygon varies depending on the ecosystem type. So some ecosystems you wouldn't expect to see them covering large areas, and whereas others you would. So these three elements receive an A to E rating, and then they're combined to give a summarized ecosystem quality rating of A to E. So users can just look at the overall quality assessment if they want, or they can drill down to the individual components and they can understand what's driving that quality value. So they can look at condition, context, and size if they want to. So the examples here sort of show the range of states observed. On the left is a high quality site. It's in good condition. It's a decent size. It's surrounded by other natural ecosystems. On the right is a lower quality site. It's smaller. There's evidence of disturbance within the site, and it's surrounded by development. And the majority of ecosystems found in the places where we live are disturbed to some degree. So in the 2014 and 2020 SEI updates, we tracked change in the inventory over the preceding 6-year period. So this is the information that allows you to talk about ecosystem loss, where that loss is occurring, and what caused that loss. So losses are reflected in the inventory line work and the attributes. So mappers sit and they draw the boundaries of areas that have been converted, and they add attributes to reflect what they've observed. We also include the cause of that loss if we can tell what it is. Sometimes areas are just cleared, but nothing has happened yet. We also look for new disturbances which haven't caused a loss of that ecosystem, but have reduced the condition. These are harder to spot, though, than the losses, so we definitely don't capture everything. And then the landscape context is recalculated to help us understand what has changed around the ecosystem, such as more development in the area. On the right here is an example of loss that we captured between 2009 and 2014. This shows something that we call nibbling. So it's fairly small areas are taken from a larger ecosystem patch, and sometimes you can see how over time that nibbling kind of continues to eat away at the ecosystem. We do also capture gains, so where restoration work such as replanting has improved the quality of existing areas or created habitat. This example here shows where a series of ponds and riparian plantings have been made. These are very hard to pick up, though. Restoration projects tend to be small in scale, and they take a number of years for the vegetation to develop and mature. We've actually taken the approach of asking local governments to tell us where they know of restoration work so that we have a better chance of kind of honing in and finding it so that we can reflect it in the mapping. So I mentioned that this is an inventory of two halves, and this influences how we report out results from the SEI. So the whole SEI region is shown here with the black outline. That includes intertidal and estuarine areas, all of our drinking water supply areas in the sort of northern area, and the forested areas, and also in the north. And much of this is protected. So looking at this whole area, the results from the 2020 SCI update show 53% of the region is considered to be a sensitive or a modified ecosystem. That's 45% sensitive and 8% modified. But if you only talk about results looking at this whole region, it obscures what's happening in the area that we call the regional core, so this green hatched area. So this is the urbanized southern part of the region that's most relevant for local decision making. So only 20% of the lands in the regional core area, which is where most residents live and work, are considered a sensitive or modified ecosystem, 15% sensitive and 5% modified. So this bar chart illustrates the overall loss of sensitive and modified ecosystems in Metro Vancouver. So you've got the whole study area in the dark green, and then the regional core shown in the light green. This is showing the results just between 2014 and 2020. The top bar here shows the totals. So 900 hectares were lost in total for the region, and 600 hectares just in the regional core, and that's just over a 6-year period. The subsequent bars show the results by ecosystem class, again by region and regional core. So young forests, mature forests, and old fields were the ones that experienced the most loss. So if you would like to access the SCI data and the technical reports, everything is up on our website. If you go to metrovancouver.org, you can search SCI. That will bring you to an online mapping tool where you can view the data and several technical reports. And if you go to our open data site, you can search SCI and you can download the data. So these are just a few sort of reflections on lessons learned over the years in case you're thinking about embarking on a mapping project yourself. I'd say documentation is key. With a project like this, you make a million decisions on method along the way. If you leave documentation to the end, you will not remember them. So keeping a log as you go was a really helpful tip that one of the consultants we worked with shared with, and I was extremely grateful for it. This is really a long-term effort. Completing an SCI or really any kind of mapping, doing it just once is still useful, but keeping it updated is a game changer. It really magnifies the benefits. It really is a valuable tool, but it is a steep learning curve. Like, you don't want to underestimate the amount of time and resources it's going to take to complete it, particularly if you're looking at a large area like this. And although one data set is not going to solve all of your mapping needs, if I had to pick one data set out of all the ecological mapping data that we have, it would be this one. It's really been very useful. Building support and understanding of what the data set is and what it can do will really help it become a long-term program rather than a one-off project. Building trust, I think, is really important by giving users detailed documentation, giving them some of those intermediate fields so they can see how you got to a final value. It helps people feel confident in the data. People really don't like black boxes where you just kind of give them a value and they don't know how you developed it. I would also say, under this sort of building support, like, find allies and ask for help. One of the best things we did was to employ kind of an expert advisor who would just kind of sit, very experienced person who would just sit and give us advice, and it was extremely helpful. And this is a continual learning exercise. Like, we've been doing this 14 years and we are still learning new lessons, coming up against new challenges as we continue to update and keep this data set going. One of the ones we're dealing with right now is thinking about how we capture forest succession. We have a very large area where the mapping relies on mapping from the 1990s, and it's going to be updated soon, and it's going to show a large amount of area that is now a sensitive ecosystem that wasn't in the previous update. So it's going to result in our numbers doing this, kind of increasing sharply. And so that's going to be a communication message. Okay, so how have we used the SCI? This is just a few examples, but hopefully shows you a bit of the the breadth of things. The SEI has helped us generate new types of data and conduct different types of analysis than we could before. So a couple of examples here. We created a carbon storage data set which quantifies stored carbon in soil and biomass across the region. This used a number of different data sets as inputs, but included the SEI, the provincial VRI data, and land cover classification. And then the second example here, using the SEI and the land cover classification, again, we were able to model ecosystem connectivity for multiple different species with different characteristics and habitat requirements, which can then be used to inform connectivity planning, restoration work, etc. As I mentioned already, data from the SEI is used to track and report out on ecosystem loss and change. This is used, and it's been used in a lot of different ways to inform policy and planning. So, for example, Metro 2050, the regional growth strategy, set in place a target to increase the area of lands protected for nature from 40% to 50% of the region's land base. So, using the SEI and some adjacent forested areas that were a little too young or too small to be captured, we've analysed where the remaining unprotected, sensitive and modified ecosystems are located across the region, and these are some of the best candidates for areas to protect. Another Metro 2050 commitment was to identify a regional green infrastructure network that connects ecosystems and provides a range of other co-benefits. And the SEI has been an important input into the network mapping process. And also the regional ecosystem connectivity evaluation I referred to in the last slide. We're updating this now to better inform some of these decisions around land use and restoration efforts. And then in regional parks, we use the SEI to help us understand where are lands with high regional conservation potential that might be candidates for future regional parks land. And we use the SEI in many different ways to inform how we plan and manage regional parks. And finally, last year, regional parks began work developing a natural asset management approach. And the first step of any asset management work is to develop an inventory of your assets, and the SEI was a key input into this inventory. Subsequent work as part of natural asset management includes assessing condition, an ecosystem services valuation, conducting risk assessment. We're now working on developing a natural asset management plan for one of our parks, and then we'll extend that to the rest of our parks. All of this relies on having good underlying data, and that data is accessible and understood by a wide range of staff, which the SEI has really helped us with. So that's everything I have. And when we get to the point of having questions, I'd be very happy to answer anything that you have.
That was amazing, Josephine. Thank you so much. A big virtual clapping, I'm sure, is happening. It's always odd at the end of a presentation like that when you don't have all the mics on. So just a reminder, everyone, we will hold questions in. I have lots, and thank you so much for sharing all of that, Josephine. We'll hold questions. You can always, if you think you're going to forget, you can always put your questions in the chat, and we'll address those at the end. So we'll hand over to Paige and Emily now.
Great. Thanks so much, Lynn. Thanks, Josephine, for sharing. It's so interesting. So thought we'd just start by introducing ourselves. My name's Paige Erickson-McGee, and I'm a program manager here at HAT, and I'll pass it to Dominique to introduce yourself.
Yeah, it's Rachel Hela, Samithia Pnasna. My name is Dominique, and I just shared my ancestral name, and I'm the Cuisinish land steward and the Centrothan language specialist here at the HAT.
Great, and I'll pass it over to Emily.
Morning, everyone. My name's Emily, and I am the stewardship coordinator at HAT.
Great. So I just wanted to start by introducing HAT a little bit. If you're not familiar, HAT was created in 1996 by the Victoria Natural History Society. We are regional, so that includes the entire Capital Regional District, and we were created to preserve natural habitats as a land trust, also known as a conservancy, which, if you're not familiar, usually help
manage land in the long term in some way. And for us, it's conservation focus. So we are a charity and a nonprofit, and our goal is to steward and protect sensitive ecosystems as well as restoration. And our approach is very community-based and collaborative. And our 4 main programs are on the slide there. And today we're going to be focusing on Good Neighbours. So we're very collaborative in almost everything that we do. Work with lots of folks, and you can visit our website for more. One of the practices we have at HAT is to place ourselves in the lands and waters. So, we work as a team to understand where on the landscape we fit and what other beings are part of the landscape too. As well, we work to understand by listening to the history and culture and importance of the lands and waters. And we're really grateful today to have Dominique to share a bit more about this later as well. So today's talk, we're going to give a brief history of 22 years and 2 minutes of the Good Neighbours program, some lessons learned in action, sort of 6 key important features of programs that protect sensitive ecosystems. Emily is going to then talk about our brand new municipal pilot partnership project with Saanich, and then Dominique's going to speak about centralizing stewardship. And then we'll have questions. So you met some of the team. We also have Juliana on staff as our wildlife coordinator. And we included our emails, so if you have questions for any of us on specifics, they're there as well. So the Good Neighbours program is really about at its core, how to be a good neighbor to nature. And we try to facilitate that by empowering individuals to understand and care for sensitive ecosystems on the land they live or in their community. And that's going to be the focus of our chat. And you can visit our website link there at the bottom for more info. And I'm going to talk a bit about the program history. So this is a bit of a timeline. The program started in 2001 at HAT, and this shows the pathway since its inception. The vision has always been, encouraging the stewardship of sensitive ecosystems on usually privately held land in some way. It really is and has been about creating corridors and buffers, connecting existing green or blue spaces like parks or other spaces to sort of connect those with through private lands. And in our region, 80% of the land is privately owned, unlike other places in BC or in the other parts of the world. And so it is a very critical part of successful conservation in the region. We began with a focus on watersheds and local parks, which was successful for many years. We found, though, the geographic focus did limit our ability to support key landowners or land managers with sensitive habitats outside of that particular focus area. And so in 2018, we transitioned to a corridor habitat focus after, a extensive program review and changed a few elements as well. And you can see we also extended our project from 1-year initiatives with sometimes multiple spaces to multi-year projects for all kinds of reasons, but I'll go into that in a moment. So this is just another view of, geographic representation of our projects by year. It's a little busy, but just to give you the sense of, the blue polygons were parks or watershed catchment areas we focused on for that year. The purple are more thematic projects we had for usually multiple years, like wildlife corridors or focus on urban forest projects. And the tiny orange blobs you can barely see are the remaining open prairie areas in the region, or Garryoke ecosystems, they're also named, near, only about 5%, potentially less. We need that beautiful regional mapping that Metro Vancouver has. But we did prioritize one geographic focus area that was identified as high priority for species at risk and sensitive habitat potential that we're working on right now. And you can see that's kind of right in the middle. There's sort of a cluster of those orange blobs. And that's our current project area. And then as well, you can see another, I don't know, maybe a strange dinosaur-shaped blob in the center, which is our Saanich project that Emily will speak to. But this gives you sort of a regional scope of where we've worked, and what it's looked like over the years. So now I'm just going to get into some of our lessons learned. So one of the pieces we've learned about, what makes a stewardship program successful in protecting sensitive ecosystems embodies these qualities. It's unique, and not just in that everyone has to have a unique idea, but that it doesn't duplicate efforts among other groups that are running programs in the community, and that we work collaboratively to fill a niche and a need socially and ecologically. And the program does need to be collaborative with experts, Indigenous partners, be inclusive. We know that we do not hold all the expertise, and we may not be the right organization for the task or the problem to solve. So we want to make sure that we are the right group for the job. Also, it's tested. So we test and assess our program effectiveness with an independent contractor, and that's done typically every project cycle. And we have them, talk to participants, talk to volunteers, and assess, what was learned and who's continuing those behaviors that they've changed or continuing that stewardship. And lastly, it's reciprocal. So it is designed with a community focus to create kind of that network where we incorporate feedback from previous stewards into the program itself to serve the new stewards better. And also Indigenous partners are included in the design, and we try to make sure that it's flexible enough to adapt and change with the needs of the community members that we're serving. One piece, this is sort of like a fifth key lesson that is really important, is cultivating trust through respect with whoever we're working with. Listening to their perception of the natural world is really critical, and also determining their barriers. And that is sometimes it's a perceived barrier to stewardship. We're talking about, what they believe is keeping them from participating or continuing that work. And we try to address those barriers with a solution. And I'm going to talk about that. Like I said, it's not always HAT that can solve that, but we try to bring solutions. And we know that, actions lead to achieving stewardship goals, but they're dependent on, what the habitat is, what the landowner's barriers are, and what values they hold as an individual. So we help them define those, and HAT also commits to goals of providing resources or expertise. Once they have that action plan, we encourage them to connect with their neighbors and give them that positive support periodically to, give that gentle encouragement as well. So like I mentioned, HAT really tries to address barriers by bringing solutions when it makes sense for that. So they're becoming more common. Long-term stewardship costs money or time. People are busy, they have families, they're getting older, or they don't have the spare capital they've invested in their property and maintenance. So we did initiate a change in 2018 where we don't just provide information, we also have been able to provide low cost or no cost labor support, things like expertise, bringing a biologist on site, or a knowledge keeper in some other way, rare species specialist. We provide native plants or say nest box structures or turtle basking logs. And then, less commonly we cost share, but sometimes, help with an electric fence to reduce, bear conflicts, or, a larger wetland restoration project. We help with that. So those are some examples of ways HAT works to address the barriers folks are facing. And now I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk a little bit about our new partnership project.
Okay, so we've launched our partner project with the District of Saanich, and it kind of follows the same methodology and general steps that the Good Neighbours program follows, that Paige just kind of outlined for you. But we'll get the opportunity to work with landowners in a bit of a more urban setting. So I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of how we began working on this project, where we're at with it now, and what we're hoping to do with it in the future. So initially, we created a partnership with the District of Saanich. The stewardship team there reached out to HAT after receiving funding to be able to run a landowner contact program in the district. And the partnership kind of began with just lots of meetings, kind of determining what each of our roles would be in the project. And we worked together to determine a focus area, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next slide. And that was based on Saanich's biodiversity conservation strategy, and then also working to align that with HAT stewardship goals and the projects that we're already working on. Paige mentioned that we do a lot of work in open prairie areas, so we wanted to align that with this new project as well. And then we worked to develop a project plan, which included a timeline. So this funding is only 1 year funding. So we wanted to make sure we were setting realistic goals for this pilot project, and then having specific targets so that we could track our progress as we went along. And then once we had kind of the plan and goals figured out, we were able to move on to actually doing the landowner contact. And so this started with developing the focus area, which you can see it's represented by this red polygon on the map there. And the focus area was chosen by HAT and the District of Saanich based on this kind of green corridor that it creates within an urban area. So that means that private land spaces are kind of connecting these green spaces that are found in the urban parks. And we used mapping as well as aerial imagery and ground truthing to choose target addresses, which you can see as all the blue dots on the map there. So we were selecting specifically for privately owned land, as well as looking for land that still looked like it had kind of remaining habitat that folks could work to steward on it. So we filtered out properties that looked like they might have been entirely paved or landscaped. And we created an online stewardship survey for people in our focus area to fill out, which asks lots of questions about their thoughts and opinions about land stewardship. So this kind of allowed us to learn more about their perceived barriers to doing stewardship work that were kind of commonly held within the focus area, and also get a baseline knowledge or a baseline understanding of the knowledge that participants already had about stewardship work, wildlife, invasive species, and those kinds of things. And we sent this postcard mail out that you can see on the left there to these 200 target addresses. And so that kind of brings us to where we are with the project now. So the survey postcard has gone out and we received a response rate of around 25%, which was a really positive indicator for us that there was interest in this project within our focus area. And around half the people who answered the survey did indicate that they were interested in learning more from us, or they were interested in having us out there for a site visit. So that went really well. And we began to do community outreach by attending events within our focus area. So we attended a community planting event put on by the District of Saanich. And then just this past weekend, we hosted a guided walk within a park in our focus area, which Dominique will talk a little bit more about. But these outreach events are really important to help us be able to meet with community members, introduce our project, and then also share education and resources about some of the common native plants and wildlife, as well as invasive species that are in the area and that they might find in their backyard. So kind of get people interested in stewardship and hearing about our project maybe for the first time. And we are now working to schedule site visits with interested landowners. So this is a really important step that's been part of all the Good Neighbours programs, where we go meet with the landowners one-on-one and hear their goals and concerns for their property. And we kind of do a tour of their property, and it's a really important step in building that initial relationship with the landowner and starting to understand kind of what their perceived barriers to stewardship are, and then how we might have the capacity to help them address those barriers. And then for each site visit, after those are completed, we'll write up a personalized report for the landowner to help provide them with guidance for their ongoing land stewardship work. So what's next for this project? We'll be following the same Good Neighbours framework that Paige outlined, and this will include community building. So we're working to build connections, relationships with the landowners who participate in this pilot project, and then also connecting neighbors to one another to foster stewardship-focused communities. We'll work to address major barriers that landowners are experiencing to doing stewardship work. So researching kind of what models might work if a major barrier, for example, is not having the time to do invasive species removal. How can we build in the time or funding needed to do so in grant applications next year? We will assess and report, so we'll complete a full project assessment with a third-party reviewer, so everyone who is involved in the pilot project will get a chance to provide input, and that will help us determine what went well and what could be improved for projects in the future. And then finally, this, like I said, this is only 1 year funding, so if funding allows, we would love to be able to expand or shift the focus area so that we could target a greater number of landowners within the CRD, within the region, and possibly even take what we've learned from this pilot project to work with other municipalities in the future, as well as continuing the relationship with the District of Saanich. So I'll pass it back over to Dominique, and she's going to talk a little bit about the work that she's been doing for this project.
Hi, it's Rachel. So yes, I've been with the hat for this season and working along, leading, co-facilitating some in this project and incorporating the Saanich language, Sinchothan language throughout the stewardship program, and especially on the Saanich project, this includes meeting with the elders and language experts in my community to translate into Sinchothan language and learning the stories, sharing some of the teachings through the HAT's education materials, the HAT's newsletter, the public events, like for example, this guided plant walk. I shared Sinchothan names of the species and some of the stories and the ecosystems, and as well as like what their significance are. A lot of times I do a lot of my referencing from just my own notes and studies from when I was in the language program, and a lot of times I also reference from just like the Saltwater People book. I'm just going to share quickly. It has all of the place names in there, so that's a huge material that I like to share just within the teachings of that in Sinchothan. Next slide, please. So, Sinchothanizing stewardship. My goal is to develop more of the resources to just ensure the areas of the hat with the Saanich community, and prioritize my Sinchothan concepts of including knowledge sharing of native species to the place names, and looking forward to more opportunities with community engagement, and incorporate more of the teachings or the knowledge of the Sinchothan language and into our designing of the Sinchothanizing stewardship for the further informations to be reaching all community, I guess, like in a wide spread of, like on the map here, and also just to create more opportunities to have the next generation to come up and learn and get inspired as well, because that's what we're targeting, is the young and the elderly. I feel a lot of the times with our walks and how the program is designed.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, on that note, I think we'll wrap up there, and I think we have a little bit of time for the question period. So I'll pass it back over to Lynn.